If you've ever gone down the rabbit hole of researching hair loss online, you know it is just a complete maze of anecdotes and, well, forum arguments. But what does the actual science, the hard data, say about a major treatment like finasteride? We're going to cut through all that noise and look directly at the clinical studies. Let's really dig in.
So that's the big question, right? We're going to put opinions aside and focus only on what we can measure, what's been tested in controlled trials. Does it work? And if so, how well? And where on the head? It's time to get into the real evidence.
Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll start with the most basic thing, hair count. Simple enough. Then, we'll get a little more sophisticated and look at hair weight. After that, we'll see if the effects last by looking at the long-term view. And finally, we'll put it all together to see what improvement actually looks like, according to the science.
Okay, first things first. The simplest way to see if something's working is just to count the hairs. It's the most fundamental question. Does finasteride result in, a genuine increase in the number of hairs on your head?
So the first batch of data we're looking at, it's not from some small, quick study. We're talking about a trial with over 1,500 men, and they were followed for 2 full years. A study of that size, well, it gives the results some real statistical muscle. And here you have it, the results. In a small target area on the scalp, the men taking finasteride gained, on average, 138 hairs over those 2 years. But, and this is so important, look at the placebo group. They didn't just stay where they were, they kept losing hair. That is a critical thing to understand here. This isn't just about gaining, it's about stopping something that's actively getting worse.
But a common question is always, yeah, but does it just work on the bald spot at the back? Fair question. Well, another study looked at that exact thing, the frontal scalp area, and the results were just as clear. They saw a significant, measurable jump in hair counts right at the front, too.
Okay, so we've established it can increase the number of hairs, but what kind of hair are we talking about? Are they those thin, wispy, barely there hairs, or are they actually getting thicker and healthier? To figure that out, we have to look past the count and into something called hair weight.
And to really get why hair weight is such a big deal, you have to understand this one key process: hair miniaturization. This is the main culprit in male pattern baldness. It's when your hair follicles literally shrink and they start producing thinner and weaker hairs until eventually they just give up. So reversing that is the real prize.
And this is where the story gets really compelling. Check this out. In one study, hair count went up by about 15.5%. That's good, but the hair weight in that exact same spot shot up by almost 36%. That is more than double the increase in the count itself. This is powerful, direct proof that the treatment isn't just popping out new hairs. It's making the ones you have thicker and stronger. It's actively fighting that miniaturization.
And that effect just gets more and more pronounced the longer you go. Look at this. After almost 4 years, the net difference in hair count between the guys on the treatment and the guys on the placebo was over 20%. But the difference in hair weight? A massive 46%. It's so clear that the treatment isn't just adding hair. It's fundamentally changing the quality and the health of the hair over time.
Which, of course, brings us to the next big question. Do these results actually last? I mean, it's one thing for a treatment to show results after a year or two, but what about 5 years down the road? For that, we turn to the long-term study.
The research paints a really consistent picture here. At year 1, you see those significant gains in hair count established. Then, a huge Japanese study found that response rates actually got better the longer people used it, even at year 3. And then, you have a 5-year Korean study, which found that almost 86% of men either maintained what they had or saw even more improvement. So, what does improvement actually mean when you look at thousands of people? Well, in that big Japanese study, about 11% had what was called a significant improvement. But then you add in the people with moderate or slight improvement, and you get to nearly 90%. That means almost 9 out of 10 men had a positive result. They either stopped or, to some degree, reversed their hair loss. All right, let's pull all this together and wrap it up. We've seen that it works, we've seen it improves hair weight, and we know the effects can last. But let's get specific. Where on the head are these improvements showing up the most?
Data from a 5-year study gives us this really clear breakdown. The biggest impact? The crowd, or the vertex. We're talking almost 90% of men saw improvement there. The frontal area was also very strong, over 61% saw improvement. And even the anterior hairline, which is famously stubborn, saw improvement in nearly half of the users. So the effect is definitely widespread, just strongest at the crown.
Look, if you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, please make it this. The data shows, over and over again, that the alternative to treatment isn't just staying the same. For all those placebo groups, the baseline was continued measurable hair loss. You're not just trying to get better than zero, you're fighting against an actively receding starting point.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most powerful number. This comes from that massive study of over 3,000 men. After tracking them for years, 87.1% of them experienced some level of hair growth. When you stack all the evidence on top of each other, the conclusion is just incredibly consistent.
So the data tells a pretty clear story. It seems possible not just to stop hair loss in its tracks, but to actually turn back the clock on the very miniaturization process that causes it. The science seems really solid. It just makes you wonder, right? If we can target this one biological pathway so effectively right now, what's the next frontier for this science going to look like?